Joseph, a wealthy businessman who had always been in control of his life, suddenly found himself facing a harsh reality of terminal illness and no one to leave his fortune to. Determined to find a deserving heir, he decided to disguise himself as a beggar, hoping to find someone with a pure heart. But as he ventured into the cold streets, his health rapidly declined and despair began to set in. Just when hope seemed lost, a young boy appeared, calling him daddy and saving him from a brutal attack. This unexpected encounter led Joseph to a shocking revelation about his past and a new purpose for his future. However, the challenges were far from over, as Joseph and the boy faced a race against time with lives hanging in the balance. As the truth unraveled, Joseph discovered not just a son, but an entire family he never knew he had, setting the stage for a journey of redemption, love, and the fight for survival. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. A wealthy man named Joseph, who had amassed a fortune through his sharp business acumen, found himself facing an unsettling truth: his body was failing him. With his once sharp features now softened by the ravages of time, he stared at the man reflected at him in the doctor's office window, a man he scarcely recognized. His hair, now gray and unruly, framed a face etched with the deep lines of worry and fatigue. It was a face that had once commanded boardrooms and struck fear into competitors, but now it seemed haunted by the inevitable approach of mortality. Sitting across from him was his doctor, a man who had not only been his medical advisor for years but also a confidant in times of need. Today, however, the doctor's face bore a gravity that Joseph had never seen before. As he reviewed the test results, a cloud of concern darkened his expression. "Joseph," the doctor began with a heavy heart, "I have to be honest with you. Without immediate treatment, you have only a few months left. Even with treatment, the odds of recovery are slim, nearly impossible, but it's still a chance." But Joseph had already resolved what path he would take. "Doctor," he said, his voice laced with unwavering resolve, "what's the point of living a few more months or even years if it's without purpose? My time here is limited, and I refuse to spend it clinging to a life that no longer holds meaning for me. I need to find someone worthy of what I've built. Someone who can carry on my legacy with the same integrity I tried to maintain. You know as well as I do that my wealth is substantial, but I can't bear the thought of leaving it to waste." The doctor, with a look of compassionate frustration, tried to steer Joseph back to reason. "Joseph, your health should be your priority. You don't have any heirs. You've known for years that you can't have children. Your focus should be on your well-being, not on an inheritance that won't matter if you're not here to manage it. Think about yourself, forget the money. And fight for your life." But Joseph's mind was made up, his heart driven by something far deeper than mere logic. "How can I think only of myself when the very essence of what I've built is at stake? I'm sterile, alone, with no one to care whether I live or die. This is my last chance to make sure everything I've worked for doesn't just vanish into nothingness. It's a burden I can't ignore." Joseph declared, his voice thick with emotion. The weight of his legacy pressed down on him, more suffocating than the terminal illness he faced. Ignoring the doctor's pleas to commence treatment immediately, Joseph concocted a plan, one that would see him strip away all the trappings of wealth and disguise himself as a beggar. "What good is clinging to life if it's just to extend my suffering? I need to find someone who values more than just money, someone who can take this fortune and use it for good," Joseph murmured, more to himself than to his bewildered doctor. "Perhaps if I walk among those who have nothing, I can find someone who sees the true worth in people, not in wealth. Yes, this idea might just work." Yet, as Joseph committed to his course of action, a storm of conflicting emotions raged within him. He knew the physical toll was growing, his body was weakening, but the fear of leaving this world without making a lasting impact gnawed at him with relentless intensity. The doctor, seeing the desperation in Joseph's eyes, made one final attempt to sway him. "Joseph, without your health, there's no future, no legacy. You have to survive first before you can worry about what comes after." But Joseph, ever the stubborn businessman, retorted with a quiet, resolute passion. "What's the point of surviving if there's no one to continue what I've started? A legacy is only as powerful as the hands it's left in. I must find someone who truly understands the value of this fortune, not just its monetary worth, but the good it can do in the world." His voice trembled slightly, betraying the overwhelming burden he bore. Joseph's heart had already chosen its path, a path that would lead him on a search, not just for an heir, but for meaning in the life he had left. Joseph was willing to sacrifice his health for this desperate quest, believing that the true choice he faced was between merely existing for a few more purposeless years or finding someone who could carry on his name and legacy. After leaving the doctor's office, he returned to his vast, empty mansion, a place that once brought him pride but now felt more like a hollow shell. There, he began to prepare for the next step in his audacious plan. As he donned torn, dirty clothes, garments so foreign to him they might as well have been from another world, he was gripped by a blend of fear and excitement. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined he would stoop to this level, but his determination to see the plan through gave him the strength to continue. "Perhaps among those who have little, who understand the true value of things, I will find someone worthy of everything I've built," he mused, trying to steady his nerves and justify the madness of his decision. As he gazed into the mirror one last time before stepping out into the unknown, he whispered to his reflection, "If this is to be my final act, let it be one that truly matters." He knew he was about to traverse uncharted territory, but the faint glimmer of hope that he might discover a genuine successor propelled him forward. With a heart full of nervous anticipation, Joseph ventured out into the city, now disguised as a man of the streets. The anonymity was both liberating and terrifying as he melted into the throngs of people, becoming just another face in the crowd. For days he wandered the streets, blending into the urban landscape, watching as people hurried past him, too preoccupied with their own lives to notice the once powerful man now hiding in plain sight. Will anyone look beyond the surface and see the value that lies beneath, he wondered, as the indifference of the city's inhabitants became a constant reminder of the uphill battle he faced. The days dragged on, each one a grueling test of his resolve. The nights, however, were the hardest to endure. The biting cold and overwhelming loneliness pressed down on him, making him acutely aware of his deteriorating health. He sought refuge in dark, secluded corners, where he could observe the ceaseless flow of humanity, desperately searching for a flicker of compassion or empathy in the endless tide of passers-by. Even here, among those who have so little, the hope of finding what I'm looking for feels like a distant dream, he reflected as despair began to creep into his thoughts. His presence remained unnoticed, just another shadow in a city teeming with life. But everything changed one stormy night when the heavens unleashed a torrential downpour. The rain came in sheets, soaking his clothes and driving the chill even deeper into his bones. Joseph huddled under a small awning, seeking what little shelter he could find, as the streets emptied, leaving him alone with the flickering streetlights and the occasional flash of lightning. It was in this moment of isolation that he noticed a group of young men approaching, their laughter cutting through the night like a knife. These young men seemed dangerous, and with my health as fragile as it is, I can't afford any trouble. Joseph thought, his pulse quickening as the group closed in on him, their energy radiating hostility. Clad in heavy jackets and caps, the young men surrounded Joseph, their presence a palpable threat. "Hey, old man, what are you doing out here all by yourself on a night like this? Look at him. He's shaking. What is it, the cold? Or are you just scared?" one of them taunted, his voice dripping with contempt. Despite the fear gnawing at him, Joseph tried to remain composed. "I'm just trying to survive, same as any of you would," he replied, hoping to diffuse the situation. But his calm words only seemed to incite them further, their intentions becoming unmistakably clear. Without warning, one of the young men lunged at him, delivering a forceful shove that sent Joseph stumbling. The attack was vicious and unrelenting, each blow landing with a sickening thud, punctuated by the cruel laughter of his attackers. The storm raged on around them, the wind howling in his ears as he struggled to defend himself. But his age and weakened state left him powerless against their onslaught. He crumpled to the ground, pain erupting in every part of his body as the storm mirrored the turmoil within him. Why must the world be so merciless to those who seek only a shred of dignity? He thought as darkness began to close in, the voices of the young men fading into a distant, malevolent hum. The rain, which had once been a simple force of nature, now seemed to weep for the tragedy unfolding on the cold, hard pavement. As Joseph lay there, battered and bruised, every breath a painful reminder of his frailty, the storm showed no signs of letting up. The young men continued their assault, their faces blurred in his vision, now clouded by pain and exhaustion. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, an unexpected sound pierced through the darkness. A strong, clear voice, full of determination and youth, cut through the chaos like a beacon of light. "Stop it. Leave my daddy alone," the words cut through the storm like a beacon of light, piercing the darkness that had enveloped Joseph. A boy appeared, his small frame brimming with a determination that seemed to shake the very ground beneath the young men. Startled, the attackers hesitated, their cruel laughter fading into uncertain murmurs. It was as if the boy's presence had broken a spell, and within moments, they retreated into the storm, disappearing as quickly as they had come. Joseph, still reeling from the brutal assault and the shock of the boy's words, blinked to clear his vision. Through the haze of pain and confusion, he focused on the boy now standing protectively beside him. "Thank you, but why did you call me Daddy?" I can't have children," Joseph stammered, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and bewilderment. The words barely made sense to him, echoing in his mind like a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp. With great effort, he accepted the boy's outstretched hand, every movement sending sharp pangs of pain through his battered body. The boy's grip was firm, his eyes filled with a deep concern that belied his young age. "I called you Dad because that's what you are. I am your son. My name is Aiden. My mother told me about you. Let's go home and I will explain everything," the boy said with a quiet but undeniable conviction. Each step Joseph took alongside Aiden was a battle against the physical agony that threatened to overwhelm him. Yet with every faltering step, he felt something else, a connection, a flicker of something he had long thought impossible. The boy's presence was more than just a physical support, it was an emotional anchor in a world that had suddenly become incomprehensible. "I'm so tired, so confused, but I need to understand what's happening," Joseph thought, his mind racing to make sense of the boy's words. "I can't have children. Is this some kind of trap? But then, why would he help me? And why? Why does he look so much like me?" The rain continued to fall, soaking them both as they navigated the slick, deserted streets. Despite the storm, Aiden moved with confidence that both puzzled and reassured Joseph. "You must have many questions. I know this is confusing, but my mother always said you were important, and that one day I should find you," Aiden said, his voice a mix of respect and a certain longing, as if he had waited his entire life for this moment. Joseph listened, his heart torn between skepticism and a fragile, growing hope. "How can this be true? If I was never able to have children," he pondered, feeling his world tilt on its axis. The possibility that Aiden could be his son was both terrifying and exhilarating, a glimmer of light in the overwhelming darkness of his recent days. But how could it be real? The thought of having a son, something he had believed was beyond his reach, left him feeling both vulnerable and desperate to believe. Finally, they arrived at a small, modest house, its warm glow spilling out into the night, offering a stark contrast to the cold, harsh world outside. Aiden led him to the door, pushing it open and calling out with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. "Mom, I'm home. I brought someone you need to see." Joseph hesitated on the threshold, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. What awaited him inside this house? He was still trying to piece together the whirlwind of emotions and thoughts that had consumed him since the attack. A woman appeared from within, drying her hands on a dish towel, her expression shifting from weariness to utter shock as her eyes landed on Joseph. It was as if she had seen a ghost. "Oh, Joseph, it can't be. How did you end up here? What are those clothes? What happened to you?" Her voice quivered with disbelief, and Joseph felt a pang of recognition as he stood face to face with Lillian, his ex-girlfriend from years past. She had aged, yes, but there was no mistaking her. The same Lillian he had once loved, now staring at him with a mixture of emotions he could barely decipher. "Lillian, I didn't know you lived here. I just had some trouble with some boys a few blocks from here, and Aiden helped me. But I'm very confused about all of this," Joseph began, his voice faltering under the weight of her gaze. Vulnerability, a feeling so foreign to him, now enveloped him entirely. He felt exposed, uncertain, like an intruder in a life that had moved on without him. Lillian shook her head slowly, still processing the sight of him standing in her doorway. "I never thought I'd see you again, and now you show up like this." "After so many years," she finally said, her voice trembling as she spoke. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the unspoken history between them. Joseph felt like a man lost at sea, clinging to the remnants of a past he had long since abandoned. "Aiden found me," he said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "He says he is my son. But you know that I can't have children. I'm sorry, but this boy can't be mine." Joseph continued, trying to make sense of the situation even as a fragile thread of hope began to weave its way through his heart. Lillian sighed, a deep, weary sound, as she ran a hand through her hair. "Joseph, Aiden is your son. I'm sure of it. Maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe there was a mistake, but I know he is yours," she said, her conviction cutting through his doubts like a knife. Her words left Joseph reeling, his mind struggling to reconcile this new reality with the one he had known for so long. "How can this be possible?" Joseph asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I've taken so many tests, in different labs, with different doctors. There's no way Aiden can be mine, even though he seems like a good boy. I would like him to be, but it's impossible," he said, though the once impossible hope now burned brighter within him. Lillian watched him closely, her eyes reflecting the internal struggle she saw in his. "You are Aiden's father, Joseph. I would never have made this up. I had to raise Aiden alone, but he always knew who you were. When we broke up, I left the city. It was a difficult time. And when I found out I was pregnant, you had moved away. And I couldn't reach you. I never thought I'd see you again," Lillian said, her voice heavy with the weight of the years and the choices she had made. Joseph felt the enormity of the situation in every word she spoke, the gravity of a past he had tried to forget now pulling him back into its orbit. "I should have looked for you," he admitted, his voice filled with regret. "But I thought it would be better this way." That you had moved on. The pain in her eyes mirrored the regret in his heart, and for the first time in years, Joseph allowed himself to confront the possibility that he had made a terrible mistake. How many wrong decisions had he made, not just in business, but in life? As he stood there, on the cusp of a new reality that defied everything he had believed, Joseph felt the cold edges of his past begin to melt away, replaced by the warmth of something he had thought lost forever: a chance at redemption, at connection, at family. And though the path ahead was still uncertain, for the first time in a long while, Joseph felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. The truth always finds a way to come to light, even when we don't expect it, Joseph thought, feeling the weight of those words as he stood there, grappling with the realization that he was being offered a second chance. The air was thick with the unresolved tension of the past, yet also tinged with the faint hope of what might be reclaimed in the present. Aiden, sensing the gravity of the moment, watched in silence, waiting patiently for his parents to navigate the turbulent emotions that swirled between them. Joseph let out a deep, weary sigh and met Aiden's gaze. "I need time to process all this, but I want to understand what happened," he said, his voice heavy with both exhaustion and a newfound resolve. Lillian nodded, her expression softening as she offered a hesitant smile, though the shock of their sudden reunion still clung to her like a shadow. The revelation that Aiden was his son lingered in the air, an unspoken truth that neither of them could fully grasp yet. But as the initial shock began to wear off, Joseph felt a surge of frustration and confusion rise within him, demanding answers that he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. "You should have told me," he exclaimed, his voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and anger. "How could you hide something like this from me?" His words echoed through the small house, each one weighted with the pain of betrayal. Lillian flinched at the intensity of his words, her own emotions simmering just beneath the surface. "I didn't know how, Joseph," she replied, her voice rising in response to his. "You had disappeared, and then I found out you were sterile. I thought you wouldn't believe me, that you'd think I was lying." Her frustration mirrored his, her words clashing with the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "But I could have helped. I could have been there for him," Joseph insisted, his voice raw with the anguish of a man who felt robbed of something irreplaceable. The knowledge that he had been denied the chance to know his son, to be a father from the very beginning, gnawed at him, fueling the anger he struggled to control. "Do you think it was easy for me?" Lillian shot back, her eyes glistening with tears she had fought hard to hold back. "Raising Aiden alone, constantly afraid of how you might react if you found out. I was terrified, Joseph. I was alone, and I thought you had moved on. You have no idea what I went through, what it was like to carry this burden by myself." Her voice trembled, each word a plea for him to understand the pain she had endured. But Joseph was too consumed by his sense of loss and betrayal to see her side. "You denied me the chance to know him, to be there for him, to be his father," he accused, the words cutting deep into the heart of their shared history. "And now I'm here, completely lost, not knowing how to deal with any of this." His frustration spilled over, his gestures sharp and angry as he tried to make sense of the chaos that had upended his life. Lillian felt cornered, her past decisions crashing down around her, leaving her no room to escape the consequences she had tried so hard to avoid. "I did the best I could with the information I had, but I never wanted to keep Aiden from you," she admitted, her voice thick with regret, as she searched for a way to bridge the widening chasm between them. Before they could say more, the argument was abruptly interrupted by a soft, weak voice. "Mom, Dad, I don't feel well," Aiden murmured, his small frame swaying as he struggled to stay upright. In an instant, the fight between Joseph and Lillian evaporated, replaced by a surge of panic as they watched their son collapse before their eyes. "Aiden," Lillian cried out, her voice breaking as she dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to rouse him. The terror in her eyes was mirrored in Joseph's as he knelt beside them, the weight of their argument forgotten in the face of this sudden emergency. "We have to get him to the hospital now," Joseph said, his voice filled with determination as he scooped Aiden into his arms. The boy felt light, too light, as Joseph held him close, his heart pounding with fear. There was no time to think, no time to dwell on the revelations or the pain that had filled the room just moments before. All that mattered now was Aiden's life. As they rushed out into the rain, the storm that had once felt like a backdrop to their turmoil now seemed like a fitting reflection of the chaos within them. The cold, wet night blurred around them as Joseph and Lillian, united by their shared fear, hurried through the streets toward the nearest hospital. With every step, the gravity of what had just happened settled deeper into Joseph's heart, a heart that had been so consumed by anger and confusion, only to be yanked back to the one thing that truly mattered. And as they raced against time, Joseph couldn't shake the thought that perhaps, amid all this pain and uncertainty, there was still a chance for redemption for him, for Lillian, and for the son he never knew he had. The drive to the hospital was a frantic race against time, with both parents now united by a single, desperate purpose: saving Aiden. Lillian gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, driving as if the very world depended on it. Beside her, Joseph cradled Aiden in his arms, trying to remain composed despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "Please, God, let him be okay," Joseph silently pleaded, each second stretching into what felt like an eternity as they sped toward the hospital. At that moment, their earlier conflict was completely forgotten, buried beneath the overwhelming urgency to protect their son. When they arrived at the hospital, the tension was almost unbearable. Nurses and doctors quickly whisked Aiden away, leaving Joseph and Lillian standing in the stark, sterile hallway, their hearts pounding with fear. The waiting room was filled with other anxious families, but to Joseph and Lillian, nothing existed except the door through which Aiden had disappeared. Time seemed to crawl as they sat side by side, lost in their thoughts, the silence between them thick with unspoken fears and unresolved emotions. Joseph's mind was a whirl of guilt and helplessness. How did we get here? He's just a boy, and now he's facing this, he thought, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a physical burden. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was partly to blame, that somehow in some way he had failed his son before even knowing him. Lillian, beside him, was a bundle of restless energy, her hands constantly moving, wringing, and twisting as her eyes remained fixed on the door, willing it to open with good news. The wait was excruciating, every minute stretching into an agonizing eternity. Finally, the door swung open and a doctor emerged, his expression serious and unreadable. Both Joseph and Lillian jumped to their feet, their hearts in their throats. "Doctor, how is Aiden?" Lillian's voice was barely more than a whisper, choked by the anxiety that had been building since they arrived. The doctor paused, his eyes somber as he looked from Lillian to Joseph, carefully choosing his words. "Aiden has a rare genetic condition," he began, his tone heavy with concern. "He experienced a severe crisis, and he needs an urgent transplant to survive." The words hit them like a physical blow, the reality of the situation sinking in with brutal clarity. Joseph felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him, the gravity of what they were facing crashing down like a tidal wave. "What can we do?" "He has to survive." Joseph's voice was thick with determination, his mind racing to find a way, any way to save his son. Lillian, standing beside him, gripped his arm as if holding on for dear life, her desperation reflected in her tear-filled eyes. "There must be something we can do," she echoed, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. The doctor shook his head slowly, his face etched with the seriousness of the situation. "We're doing everything we can to find a compatible donor, but it's complicated due to the rarity of his condition." His words were like a cold, hard slap of reality, the severity of Aiden's condition sinking in with crushing finality. As the doctor explained the details, Joseph could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, each word hammering home the urgency of the situation. Aiden's life hung in the balance, and time was running out. Desperation clawed at Joseph, and suddenly an idea struck him. "Is there any chance I could be compatible?" he asked, the thought surging to the forefront of his mind as he grasped for any solution, any hope. Lillian turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of hope. "We can run tests to find out," the doctor replied, his voice reflecting the urgency that had taken hold of all of them. As they waited for the test results, the waiting room seemed to close in around them, the walls pressing in as the silence became almost unbearable, filled with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. Joseph turned to Lillian, his determination shining through the fear that had gripped him. "We need to figure this out, Lillian. We need a plan, a way to get Aiden what he needs," he said, his voice firm despite the turmoil in his heart. Lillian nodded, her tears threatening to spill over as she squeezed his hand tightly. "We have to hold on to hope," she whispered, her voice quivering but resolute. "No matter how difficult this is, we'll get through it together. We have to believe that things will work out." The doctor's news had shattered their world, but in that moment, standing side by side, they both knew that they would do whatever it took to save their son. Aiden's struggle was just beginning, and they would face it together, as a family, no matter what it took. Sometime later, Joseph and Lillian found themselves in the bustling hospital laboratory, where the air was thick with tension and urgency. Doctors and nurses moved swiftly, their faces set in expressions of focused determination as they carried samples and results back and forth. Joseph sat in a hard, uncomfortable chair, his heart pounding as he watched the doctor scrutinize the test results. Each second felt like a lifetime as he waited for the news that would determine their future. Finally, the doctor turned to them, his face a mixture of complex emotions that were difficult to read. "Mr. Joseph, MS, Lillian, I have the test results," he began, his voice heavy with gravity. Joseph and Lillian leaned in, their hearts in their throats. First, the doctor continued, "The DNA test confirms that Mr. Joseph is indeed Aiden's biological father." The words hit Joseph like a wave, a rush of conflicting emotions swirling within him. He felt a profound sense of awe and disbelief. "My God," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "How is this possible? How can I be worthy of such a grand blessing?" As this tears welled up in his eyes, the enormity of the revelation nearly overwhelming him. But the doctor's expression grew more serious as he continued. "Unfortunately, the tests also show that Mr. Joseph cannot be a donor due to his fragile health condition. The procedure could be fatal for him, and even if he survived, the effort would be in vain. Your heart condition, likely exacerbated by recent stress, makes it too dangerous." His words hung in the air like a dark cloud, the hope that had briefly sparked in Joseph's heart quickly dimming. Lillian gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "What does this mean for Aiden and Joseph?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. The doctor sighed, his eyes reflecting the weight of the situation. "It means we need to find another donor for your son as quickly as possible," he replied, the urgency clear in his tone. "And as for Mr. Joseph, I strongly recommend that he begins treatment immediately. Your health is at serious risk, Mr. Joseph." Before they could fully absorb the gravity of the news, a nurse burst into the room, her face pale with concern. "Doctor, patient Aiden's condition is rapidly deteriorating. We need immediate intervention," she said, her voice laced with urgency. The doctor nodded, his face set in a grim expression as he prepared to leave. "I will do everything I can for him," the doctor assured them, his eyes locking with theirs. "But time is running out. Please do whatever you can to save my son," Lillian pleaded, tears streaming down her face. The fear and desperation in her voice were palpable. Joseph, filled with a mix of helplessness and determination, stood up, ready to follow the doctor, but a sudden wave of dizziness washed over him. He had to steady himself against the wall, his body betraying the fragility that his mind refused to acknowledge. "Joseph, you need to take care of yourself too. We can't lose both of you," Lillian said, rushing to his side, her voice trembling with worry. But Joseph shook his head, trying to push through the fog of weakness that threatened to overwhelm him. "I can't think about myself right now, Lillian. Aiden needs us," he replied, his voice firm despite the tremor in his limbs. As they watched helplessly while the doctor and nurse hurried back to Aiden's side, a heavy silence fell between them. Lillian's face reflected an intense internal struggle, her emotions warring within her. Finally, as if coming to a painful decision, she turned to Joseph, her eyes filled with unshed tears and a look of deep resolve. "Joseph, there is something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet laden with the weight of the secret she had been carrying. Joseph stared at her, his confusion and apprehension growing. "What is it, Lillian? What could be so important now?" he asked, bracing himself for whatever revelation was to come. Lillian took a deep, steadying breath, gathering the courage to finally speak the words she had kept hidden for so long. "Aiden has a twin sister," she confessed, her voice shaking slightly. "Her name is Ilya. I gave her up for adoption when they were born." The room fell into a stunned silence, the words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Joseph staggered, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. He struggled to comprehend what he had just heard, his mind reeling from the shock. "A twin sister," he echoed, his voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me? How could you have kept this from me?" Lillian's eyes filled with tears as she tried to explain, her voice trembling with guilt and regret. "I was scared, Joseph. I was alone, and I didn't know how to handle it. After you left, I didn't know where to turn, and when I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I thought it would be best for Ilya to have a chance at a better life, but I never imagined it would come to this. I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking as she finally released the burden she had carried for years. Joseph felt his world spinning, the ground slipping out from under him as he tried to process the enormity of what she had just revealed. A twin sister, another child he had never known, lost to him because of choices made in fear and desperation. The weight of it all threatened to crush him, and for a moment he felt completely and utterly lost. But then, amid the swirling chaos of his thoughts, one clear realization broke through. If Ilya was out there, she might be the key to saving Aiden. Gripping Lillian's hand tightly, he looked into her tear-filled eyes with a renewed sense of purpose. "We need to find her, Lillian. We need to find Ilya, and we need to do it now. She could be Aiden's only hope." A twin sister? How? Why, Joseph stammered, the shock of the revelation rendering him almost speechless, his mind struggling to process the gravity of what Lillian had just confessed. "I couldn't raise 2 babies alone," Lillian began, her voice trembling as she relived the painful memories. "I was in such a difficult financial situation. I barely had enough to eat, let alone provide for 2 newborns. I was so desperate, Joseph. I didn't know how to find you, how to ask for help. I tried everything, but I was alone. And I couldn't support 2 babies on my own. Our children, they were in such a hard place. I couldn't stand to see them suffering, crying out of hunger. I thought I was doing the best thing for everyone. But now, she might be Aiden's only chance." She explained, each word laden with regret and sorrow. Joseph stared at her, a tumultuous wave of emotions surging through him: shock at the revelation, anger at the years lost, and a glimmer of hope that this new information might save his son. A twin sister. She could be the perfect donor. He murmured, the realization hitting him with the force of a freight train. Suddenly, the piercing sound of alarms blaring from Aiden's room shattered the air, yanking them both back to the present crisis. The corridor outside Aiden's room erupted into chaos as doctors and nurses rushed towards the source of the alarm. Joseph and Lillian turned to each other, their faces pale with fear. Aiden's condition was worsening by the minute, and the new information about Aya was now more critical than ever. They were running out of time, and every second counted. Without hesitation, Joseph sprang into action, his business instincts taking over despite the emotional turmoil raging within him. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone and began making a series of frantic calls. The calm, controlled demeanor that had defined him for so long was now replaced with a tone of desperate urgency. "I need all available resources mobilized immediately. Track down the adoption agency, search the records, do whatever it takes to find her, he barked into the phone, his voice reverberating down the hospital corridor. Lillian, meanwhile, stood frozen outside Aiden's room, torn between the sight of her son lying unconscious and the sight of Joseph pacing back and forth, gesturing furiously as he made call after call. The hours dragged on, each minute an agonizing eternity. Joseph had pulled together a team of lawyers, private investigators, and even government contacts, each tasked with finding Aya. The search spread rapidly, with people scouring adoption records, interviewing former agency staff, and following every possible lead. Yet, with each passing hour, hope grew dimmer. Any news from the agency? Did the old orphanage provide more information about Aya? Joseph asked one of his assistants, his voice tinged with frustration and anxiety. Nothing yet, sir. The records from that time are incomplete, and many of the staff have either retired or moved away. We're doing our best to track down former employees, came the disheartening reply. As the hours wore on, frustration gave way to despair. Every promising lead ended in a dead end, and the weight of their situation grew heavier with each passing moment. Joseph, exhausted and feeling the toll of the day's events, found himself staring at the monitors displaying Aiden's vital signs. Each beep was a cruel reminder of the precious time that was slipping through their fingers. Lillian sat beside Aiden, holding his hand tightly, whispering words of comfort, though her voice was choked with tears. What if we don't find her in time, Joseph? What will we do? What if there's no compatible donor? Lillian asked, her voice trembling with fear. Joseph clenched his fists, his eyes burning with determination despite his fatigue. We can't think like that, Lillian. We will find her. We have to find her, he replied, his voice filled with a resolve that masked the desperation lurking beneath the surface. The night stretched on, and Aiden's condition continued to worsen. Doctors entered and left his room with increasing frequency, adjusting medications and checking equipment, their expressions growing more concerned with each visit. The tension in the air was palpable, thick as the storm clouds that seemed to gather over their heads. Joseph, now seated beside Lillian, held her hand as they sat in a shared silence, both lost in their thoughts and fears. Suddenly, Joseph's phone rang, shattering the silence and making them both jump. He answered it quickly, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. "Sir, we found a lead on Aya, but it's complicated," said the voice on the other end of the line, hesitating as though unsure of how to proceed. Joseph felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his chest. "Complicated how? Speak quickly, for God's sake." The pause that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Joseph and Lillian exchanged anxious glances, their breaths held as they waited for the news. When the voice on the phone spoke again, it was tinged with hesitation and regret. "The woman who adopted Aya. They moved abroad years ago. We're trying to track down which country, but the records are confusing and incomplete," the voice explained, the words hitting Joseph like a sledgehammer. Joseph felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The idea that Aya might be in another country, perhaps thousands of miles away, felt like a cruel twist of fate, a final blow to their already fragile hopes. Lillian gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she struggled to hold back tears. "God, no. This can't be happening," Joseph muttered, his voice breaking as the reality of their situation set in. The ground seemed to shift beneath him, the weight of despair pressing down like a lead blanket. Lillian, fighting back her tears, looked at Joseph with a mixture of desperation and determination. "We can't give up, Joseph. There has to be a way to find her. We can't lose Aiden. We can't," she pleaded, her voice trembling with emotion. Joseph, his heart heavy with the enormity of the task before them, nodded slowly. "We won't give up, Lillian. We'll find her, no matter where she is. We have to, for Aiden," he said, though the resolve in his voice was tinged with the fear of what might happen if they didn't succeed. As the night dragged on, the search for Aya intensified, with Joseph's team working around the clock to track down any possible lead. But as the hours passed, the reality of the situation became increasingly dire. Aiden's condition was worsening, and time was running out. The hope of finding Aya in time began to slip through their fingers like sand, leaving Joseph and Lillian clinging to each other in the face of the terrifying uncertainty that lay ahead. Joseph turned to Lillian, his heart pounding with a mixture of panic and determination. Aya might be living outside the country. We don't know exactly where yet, but my entire team is searching for her as we speak, he said, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Lillian's eyes filled with tears, which finally spilled over as the enormity of the situation hit her. "Oh no, she can't be so far away. Not now," she cried, her voice breaking with despair. Joseph, fighting to stay composed, squeezed Lillian's hand tightly. "Kaki, we won't give up. I'll mobilize every international contact I have. We will find her, even if I have to turn the world upside down," he vowed, his voice fierce with determination. Just minutes later, Joseph's phone rang again, piercing the tense silence of the hospital room. He answered it with a shaky breath, his voice raw with exhaustion and a flicker of hope. "Speak," he commanded, dispensing with formalities as the urgency of the situation consumed him. On the other end, his investigator's voice was laced with urgency. "Sir, we found Aya. She is in a hospital in Spain." Relief washed over Joseph for a brief moment, but it was quickly replaced by a new wave of anxiety. Why would she be in a hospital, he asked, his mind racing as he put the phone on speaker so Lillian could hear. Lillian's voice trembled with fear as she asked, "In a hospital? What happened to her?" The investigator hesitated, the weight of the news evident in his pause. "Sir, Aya is also sick. Very sick." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating them both. The investigator continued, his tone filled with concern. "From the records we managed to access, Aya has been diagnosed with the same genetic condition as Aiden. She also needs an urgent transplant." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still as Joseph and Lillian absorbed the devastating news. Joseph stood abruptly, his mind whirling as he tried to process the information and find a solution. "I need to speak with her doctors immediately," Joseph demanded, his tone leaving no room for delay or objection. Lillian, tears streaming down her face, whispered, "My children. Both suffering, and I didn't even know." Joseph quickly arranged a video conference with the medical team in Spain. The screen flickered to life, revealing the tired and worried faces of the Spanish doctors, reflections of the exhaustion and anxiety etched on Joseph and Lillian's faces. The Spanish doctor, speaking in a calm but urgent tone, explained Aya's situation, detailing the severity of her condition. "Aya's condition is critical," the doctor concluded, his voice heavy with the gravity of the situation. "Like her brother, she needs a transplant as soon as possible." Desperate to find a way to save his children, Joseph asked, "Doctor, what if? What if they could donate to each other?" His voice was tinged with a desperate hope, clinging to any possibility. The doctor on the screen shook his head sadly. "Unfortunately, both children are too weak to be donors for each other at this moment." The words hit Joseph like a hammer blow, and he felt a crushing sense of helplessness wash over him. He turned to Aiden's doctor, who had quietly entered the room during the video conference, hoping against hope that there was still something he could do. "Doctor, is there any possibility that I could donate to one of them?" Joseph asked, his voice strained with desperation. The doctor frowned, deep in thought, before answering. "Mr. Joseph, given that you are the biological father, there is a chance you could be a match. But with your recently discovered heart condition, it would be extremely risky. The likelihood of your survival is very slim, as you've already been advised. The doctors here and in Spain would likely agree. But technically, yes, it might work. Lillian gripped Joseph's arm, her eyes wide with fear and sorrow. "No, Joseph, you can't risk your life like this. We have to find another way. There's still time to search. You have so many contacts, there has to be another option." Joseph covered her hand with his own, his voice gentle but resolute. "If there's a chance to save our children, I need to try," he said, his decision firm despite the terror gnawing at him. Time seemed to speed up, the gravity of the situation pressing down on them as they faced an impossible choice. The thought of saving one child at the potential cost of the other, or losing them both, was a nightmare come to life. Joseph could feel the weight of every passing second, each one bringing them closer to a decision that could tear their world apart. "How can we choose, Joseph? How can we choose between our children?" Lillian sobbed, her voice thick with anguish. Joseph closed his eyes, feeling the crushing weight of the decision he knew he had to make. "We can't, Lillian. We can't choose between them," he said, his voice heavy with the unbearable burden. "But I will do whatever it takes. I will donate to both of them if it means saving their lives. I don't care about anything else." He looked directly at the doctors on the screen and in the room, his decision resolute. "I will donate to both of my children," he declared, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. Dr. Ramirez, the Spanish doctor still on the video conference, was the first to respond. "Mr. Joseph, you need to fully understand the risks. Your heart condition makes this procedure extremely dangerous. The chances of survival are..." Joseph raised a hand, cutting him off. "I don't need to know the odds, doctor. I just need to know if there's a chance to save my children." Lillian, tears streaming down her face, clutched Joseph's hand tighter. "Joseph, please think carefully. We can't lose you too." Joseph met her gaze, his eyes filled with a determination that left no room for argument. "This is the only way, Lillian. If there's even a small chance that I can save them, I have to take it." The doctors, understanding the gravity of the situation and the resoluteness of Joseph's decision, began to outline the immediate steps needed to proceed. The urgency in their voices reflected the critical nature of the situation. Joseph's decision had set into motion a race against time, one that would test the limits of medicine, the strength of his body, and the unyielding love he had for his children. "Aya, where is my Aya?" Mrs. White's voice trembled with the weight of her emotions as she hurried down the hospital corridor. Her eyes, red from crying and exhaustion, frantically searched for her daughter. Lillian stepped forward, her own heart pounding as she faced the woman who had cared for Aya all these years. She extended her hand, trying to offer some semblance of calm amid the chaos. "Mrs. White, I'm Lillian, Aya's biological mother, and this is Joseph, her father." Lillian introduced herself softly, her voice filled with both gratitude and trepidation. Mrs. White halted, her eyes flickering between Lillian and Joseph, absorbing the gravity of the situation. The tension in the air was palpable, every moment heavy with unspoken emotions. Then, in an unexpected gesture, Mrs. White knelt beside Joseph's wheelchair, her hands trembling as she took him into hers. The act was both humbling and heartbreaking, a silent acknowledgement of the shared pain and hope that bound them together in that moment. "Thank you," Mrs. White whispered, her voice cracking as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Thank you for what you did for Aya, and for Aiden. I can't imagine how difficult this has been for you." Joseph, still weak from the surgery, but filled with an overwhelming sense of relief and gratitude, squeezed her hands gently. "We are all family now," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Aya is as much a part of you as she is of us. We wouldn't have known she existed if it weren't for you. And now, because of you, both our children have a chance." Mrs. White nodded, her tears flowing freely as she looked at Lillian and Joseph with a mix of sorrow and deep gratitude. "I was so scared of losing her, scared of this entire situation. But seeing you both here, I understand now. We all want what's best for Aya and Aiden. We all love them. Lillian knelt beside Mrs. White, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. We are in this together for Aya and Aiden. Thank you for loving Aya and raising her so well. I know this must be incredibly hard, but we will face it together. The three parents sat together in silence, the shared understanding and mutual respect forming a bond that transcended their fears. They knew that the journey ahead would be challenging and filled with uncertainty and difficult decisions, but they also knew that they would face it as a united front, driven by the love they shared for Aya and Aiden. After a few moments, Mrs. White rose slowly, her eyes filled with determination. "I want to see Aya now," she said, her voice stronger, more resolved. Lillian and Joseph nodded, and a nurse guided Mrs. White to Aya's room, where the girl lay recovering. Lillian and Joseph remained in the corridor, giving Mrs. White the space she needed to reconnect with her daughter, but also knowing that the next steps they would take would be together. As they waited, Lillian turned to Joseph, her eyes reflecting the deep gratitude she felt. "You saved them, Joseph. You gave them both a fighting chance. I don't know how to thank you enough." Joseph, still processing everything that had happened, simply shook his head. "We did it together, Lillian. It's not about thanking me, it's about moving forward as a family, no matter how unconventional it might be." Lillian smiled softly, her heart swelling with love and respect for the man beside her. A family. Yes, that's exactly what we are now. In the days that followed, Aya and Aiden's recovery became the focus of their combined efforts. The medical teams from both Spain and their home country worked tirelessly, with constant updates and collaborative care ensuring that both children received the best possible treatment. Joseph's condition remained fragile, but his resolve never wavered. He spent as much time as he could by their bedsides, whispering words of encouragement and love. Lillian and Mrs. White alternated between caring for the children and supporting each other, their bond strengthening with each passing day. Finally, after weeks of intensive care and treatment, Aya and Aiden were declared stable enough to continue their recovery at home. The day they were discharged was filled with a mixture of relief, joy, and cautious optimism for the future. As the two families, now forever intertwined, prepared to leave the hospital, Joseph paused in the doorway, taking a deep breath. "We've been through so much, but this is just the beginning. Our children have a chance at life now, and we have a chance to build something new." Lillian, standing beside him, nodded. "We've faced the worst together, and we've come out stronger. Whatever the future holds, we'll face it as a family." Mrs. White, holding Aya's hand, looked at Joseph and Lillian with a grateful smile. "Thank you for letting me be a part of this. I know we've got a long road ahead, but I wouldn't want to walk it with anyone else." Together they stepped out into the sunlight, united by the trials they had endured and the love they now shared for their children. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face it together, as a family bound not just by blood, but by choice, love, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the most difficult of times. "Mr. Joseph, Mrs. White began, her voice trembling with emotion as she knelt beside his wheelchair. "I have no words to truly express what I'm feeling at this moment. The courage, love, and sacrifice you've shown are beyond anything I've ever witnessed. When I adopted Aya, I vowed to protect and love her with all my heart. But you, a man who barely knew her, risked everything, your health, your life, to save her. Even though you are her biological father, it was a love so deep, so unconditional, that it leaves me utterly speechless." She paused, tears streaming down her face, as she continued, "I was desperate when the doctors couldn't find a compatible donor. I had no information about Aya's biological family, and I was drowning in despair. Then you appeared, embarking on a dangerous journey, crossing oceans, facing unimaginable risks, all for a girl you'd never seen before. That is a depth of paternal love that I can't even begin to fathom. It's the same love I would have given if I could have saved her myself. Mrs. White's voice shook as she added, I know it must have been an incredibly difficult decision, risking your own life, leaving everything behind, just for a chance to save not only Aya but also Aiden. This act of pure, selfless love is more than inspiring, it's a beacon of hope in a world that often seems so dark. You didn't just save Aya, you taught me a lesson in love that I will carry with me forever. You showed that true love knows no bounds, that it doesn't waver in the face of danger or despair. When I think about the agonizing hours you must have spent on that plane, taking care of Aya even while your health was deteriorating, it moves me beyond words. And then, to undergo such a risky surgery, willing to give up a part of yourself to save your children, it's an act of pure heroism. Joseph listened, his eyes filled with tears, overwhelmed by the sincerity and gratitude in Mrs. White's words. She continued, her voice soft but full of conviction. I want you to know that no matter what happens from here on, you have already done more for Aya than I could have ever asked for. You've given her life, a future, and an example of what it means to love deeply and selflessly. Our situation is complex, with so many emotions and histories entwined, but I want you to know how eternally grateful I am. You are not just Aya's biological father, you are a true hero in her life. Mrs. White took a deep breath, her voice firm despite her tears. I promise you, Mr. Joseph, that I will do everything in my power to honor your sacrifice. Aya will know this story. She will know the incredible love her biological father has for her. And whatever the outcome of this surgery, I will keep the doors open for you and Lillian to be part of her life. You have given us a lesson in love, courage, and sacrifice that has transformed not only Aya's life but mine as well. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for being the father Aya deserves, the hero she needed at this critical moment. She finished her heartfelt speech, tears flowing freely down her face, and both Joseph and Lillian were visibly moved by her words. The hospital corridor, once filled with tension and fear, now seemed to resonate with a deep sense of love and gratitude, transcending the complexities of their unique situation. In the weeks following the surgery, emotions ran high. Aiden and Aya recovered steadily, gaining strength with each passing day. However, Joseph's condition remained precarious. His body, already weakened by age and the enormous strain of the procedures, was fighting a battle that seemed impossible to win. Lillian and Mrs. White took turns at his bedside, their faces marked by sleepless nights and constant worry. He's going to make it, isn't he? Aiden asked Lillian, his young voice trembling with uncertainty. Lillian forced a smile, gently brushing her son's hair. Your father is the strongest man I know, Aiden. He won't give up. He's fighting with everything he has, she assured him, though her heart ached with the uncertainty of her own words. One night, as they kept vigil by Joseph's side, a doctor rushed into the room, his eyes alight with a new sense of hope. We have a chance, he announced, barely containing his excitement. There's a new treatment, it's experimental, but it's showing great promise. It's a revolutionary therapy that combines cellular regeneration with nanotechnology. It could not only treat Joseph's heart condition, but potentially reverse the damage. Joseph, despite his weakened state, managed a faint smile. Doctor, I've put my trust in you before. I'll do it again, he replied, his voice filled with quiet determination. Lillian, tears of relief and hope glistening in her eyes, squeezed Joseph's hand. We will get through this together, Joseph. We will fight as a family. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. The treatment was grueling, pushing Joseph to his limits, but slowly, signs of improvement began to emerge. His color returned, his breathing grew easier, and the spark in his eyes, which had dimmed, began to shine once more. Aya, still recovering herself, insisted on visiting Joseph every day. Daddy, you have to get better soon. We have so much to catch up on, she said, her voice soft but filled with resolve. Joseph smiled, feeling a surge of strength and love at his daughter's words. "For you, I will do the impossible. I promise." As Joseph fought his way back to health, Mrs. White made a life-changing decision. After many conversations with Lillian and much soul-searching, she resolved that she could not keep Aya apart from her newfound family. "I'm going to move here," she announced one morning, her voice steady with determination. "Aya deserves to have all of us in her life. She needs her biological parents as much as she needs me. We will be a family together." Lillian and Joseph were overwhelmed by her decision. They knew it wasn't easy for Mrs. White to leave behind her life and home, but her commitment to Aya's happiness was unwavering. Together, they began the process of building a new, blended family. The path ahead was not without challenges. There were still many emotions to navigate, and the dynamics of their unique situation required patience, understanding, and time. But with each step forward, they grew closer, united by their love for Aya and Aiden and their shared journey through the darkest of times. As they moved forward, the bonds between them deepened, transforming their once separate lives into a tapestry of love, courage, and resilience. They knew that the road ahead would be long and sometimes difficult, but they were ready to face it together, as a family in every sense of the word. And in that unity, they found the strength to heal, to hope, and to embrace the future with open hearts. Lillian embraced Mrs. White, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. "You are already part of our family. You will always be Aya's mother. DNA doesn't matter. What matters is the love and care you gave Aya when I couldn't. I can never thank you enough for the unconditional love you provided," Lillian said, her voice thick with emotion. Mrs. White returned the embrace, feeling the weight of her fears and doubts lift as she realized that she was truly welcomed into this new, blended family. "And you will always be her mother too. Aya now has double the love, and that's a beautiful thing," she replied, her tears mingling with Lillian's as they shared a moment of mutual respect and understanding. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, Joseph's recovery became more evident. The revolutionary treatment that had once seemed like a distant hope was now a reality, working miracles not just on his heart but revitalizing his entire body. Joseph began taking short walks down the hospital corridors, first supported by Lillian, then on his own, and finally with Aiden and Aya by his side, their small hands holding onto his, as if anchoring him to life. Joseph chuckled, a sound that had become more frequent as his strength returned. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" he replied, his eyes twinkling with a newfound joy. The day of Joseph's discharge arrived, not as an end, but as the start of a new chapter. The family, now expanded to include Mrs. White, gathered at the hospital entrance. Joseph stood without assistance, his heart swelling with gratitude as he looked at each face around him. Lillian, Aiden, Aya, and Mrs. White, each one a part of the miracle that had saved him. "So, where are we going now?" Aiden asked, his voice filled with the excitement of a new beginning. Joseph smiled, pulling everyone into a warm, encompassing group hug. "Home, my loves. Finally, we're all going home," he said, his voice filled with a peace he had never known before. As they stepped out of the hospital into the bright sunlight, a future that had once seemed distant and unreachable now lay before them, full of promise and possibilities. Joseph reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. From a lonely millionaire disguised as a beggar, searching for purpose, he had found something far more valuable: family, love, and the true meaning of wealth. With Lillian by his side, Aiden and Aya safe in his arms, and Mrs. White completing their circle, Joseph knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. They were the family they were always meant to be, bound by love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds forged through their shared trials. As they walked into their new life together, Joseph felt a deep contentment, knowing that he had found his true legacy in the hearts of those he loved. As we close this incredible journey, we're left with a powerful story of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Joseph's transformation from a lonely millionaire searching for meaning to a devoted father willing to risk everything for his children teaches us that true wealth isn't measured in money, but in the love and connections we build with others. So, what have you learned from this story? What lessons from Joseph, Lillian, Mrs. White, Aiden, and Aya will you carry forward in your own life? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us one thing you've learned and how you plan to bring it into practice in your daily life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to hearing how this story has touched your life.